Treatable or not, a cancer diagnosis will play hell with your emotions. My anxiety and depression don't need any help thought spiraling on their own, and then this. So lately I've been listening to my headphones near constantly. And when my usual shows weren't enough to keep me from thought spiraling, I switched to audiobooks. I wasn't expecting much from Soul Eater by Lily Mayne, but it ended up being the exact dose of morbid I needed. The Monster series by Lily Mayne is a post-apocalyptic dystopian monster love romance series that takes place in an America that has been overrun by monsters, which the American military overreacted to and now controls a very few set of cities, and raiders and monsters roam the wastes. I only read the first 3 books in the series so far because that's all Hoopla would allow me to get this month, but there are currently 7 books in total and a couple short stories. I think one of the things that stood out to me is when I've read this sort of book before, it tends to focus much more on the romance and put the dystopia stuff on a back burner. And this one does that mostly with the world building. It never forgets that this world is a miserable place. The book opens with our main character, Danny, preparing to be cannon fodder for a military that he doesn't believe in a fruitless attempt to take down a singular monster. When Danny's out in the wastes, you are reminded of the dystopia every time he is excited about taking a freezing cold shower or eating a 20-year-old protein bar. Even when the series does start to focus more on the romance, it never forgets its setting. First book follows Danny, the aforementioned soldier, and Wynn, aka the Soul Eater. He's known as being a violent serial killer who pops up every few years to murder thousands of humans indiscriminately, and he is our main love interest. It starts with Wynn murdering an entire squad of soldiers, but for some reason leaving Danny untouched. The military starts trying to use Danny to gain his favor, and it leads to Wynn just escaping with Danny instead. Now, the world building in the first book isn't amazing. It's very front-loaded, and then later on, they don't do a great job of establishing certain things or the reason for certain choices. Like, the military is clearly overpowered here, and there are new, larger city-states that are a bunch of people pressed together and everywhere else has been abandoned, but it doesn't really explain what the rest of the world looks like, how exactly we got to this point, and what the current system and power looks like. We actually don't get more answers on that until book 3, and even then it's only briefly mentioned. The first thing to clarify is that Wynn isn't technically a serial killer. He pops up every few years to help cull the population of a parasite that lives inside humans and can mimic their actions and memories for about a week or so before they eventually are killed by the parasite and carry on its eggs. Why Wynn doesn't just tell the military this, that he's not actually a serial killer, is never properly explained. It's pretty much hand-waved with, oh, a lot of the military has parasites in some of their leaders, but it's never clarified why that means they can't go to someone they know for a fact doesn't have a parasite. Because Wynn can sense the presence of them. It's not random guessing. There's not like a specific test to do like in The Thing. He just knows. I really enjoy Danny as a narrator. He's cynical about the military and the circumstances he got stuck with, but he's also so sweet and takes joy in the little things. Something I like about the first book is that it takes several weeks for them to go from traveling companions to genuine friends to an attraction and relationship. Part of this being because Danny is canonically demisexual. He never uses the word demisexual, but he does talk about thinking that he might have been asexual at some point because he just wasn't into anybody until Wynne. And it's especially sweet for Wynne because he's very self-conscious about the way he looks and how he scares everyone around him, and he has very few friends. But when you're a 12,000-year-old murderer, that's pretty common, I assume. Well, Danny does trust Wynne enough to go and travel with him. It does still take him time to fully trust that Wynne is a believable and safe person. He doesn't believe him about the whole parasite thing until he witnesses it for himself. This is also where the Soul Eater nickname comes from, because when he sucks the parasite out of their bodies, it looks like he's eating their soul, which I love that. I would kind of like more of that. A lot of their journey is really morbid and kind of gory, but like half of it is them just hanging out in hotel rooms, so like at least there's a balance. There's a section of the book basically dedicated to showing just how flimsy humans are in this world. Wynne and his monster friend Eden, a big purple dude with horns, end up going to a parasite nest to try and eradicate it. They tell Danny to stay behind, but not wanting to be a burden or treated like a child, he follows them anyway, and nearly gets himself and Wynne killed. Not that Wynne would actually die, like he's basically a cockroach. And they establish that Eden can regrow limbs if the animal bites them off, so they're near indestructible compared to a human. So they give reasons for having to leave the squishy human love interest behind, but they actually give stakes and a reason beforehand so you're not just bored with it. That said, there are still moments where they sideline the human love interest that I really wish would have been done differently, because each book is told first person from the human's point of view. There's one point where Danny is getting tortured and beaten and suddenly passes out, and then he wakes up and he's in a hotel room. And Wynne just swooped in and saved him off screen. Zero tension. All you had to do was throw in a little line about Danny hearing or seeing something out of the corner of his eye right before he passes out, and there would at least be a little tension there and not just feel like we got left out of the action. The second book, Eden, is, of course, about the big purple guy. Unlike the first book, where the relationship and them figuring stuff out was the plot, the second book has the driving plot of Hunter, our main human character, and his monster hunting partner Charlie being separated. Eden comes across Hunter after his military partner Charlie has been kidnapped by monsters, and they're on a quest to track down Charlie and save him from monsters that have forced him into a human-monster fighting ring. Which sounds stupid, but ends up actually being a good bit of world building. Since the first book just had Eden kind of pop in and out for a little bit, that's mostly what I was expecting with other characters, potentially a sneak peek at the book 3 characters. I was pleasantly surprised that Wynne and Danny actually come back to be major characters for most of the book. The parasite thing is brought up again, and once again, nobody comes up with a real reason why they shouldn't be telling the human population about it. Like, I know both the military guys didn't believe it until they saw it, but, like, surely you could get proof of something. You could, like, take one of the parasite-ridden people hostage and, like, show it to a bunch of people in public or something, right? That's very feasible. The relationship itself is nice. It's got an I'm annoyed with you to lovers thing. I do like the dynamic of a guy who can regrow his limbs being with somebody who has a prosthetic. Eden kind of sees that and his scars as a sign of strength, because Eden never keeps those markers of his past and his injuries. If I had a nickel for every monster love book I've read where a giant purple man and a paramilitary guy with a leg prosthetic got together in the second book of a series, I would have 2 nickels. Long story short, they find Charlie, meet another human that's probably gonna back in a future book, yada yada yada, and they end up living at a doomsday prepper's homestead for a while. And that's another thing, even when it's idyllic and sweet, it's still reminding you, like, hey, they don't have electricity. Hey, they have a bunker full of guns on the property. Hey, there are random monsters that like to roam around the woods. I know I haven't gone as much into the darker side of things, but I think a really good example is going to come up in the third book. The third book is our first big switch from following very connected military and monster characters to following a character from a raider camp. Raiders are groups of people who live out in the wastes and have banded together to keep themselves alive. They have a reputation for being ruthless and violent, and the military does not like them. But the military doesn't like anybody, so that's not really saying much. Raiders have their own culture that's pretty common throughout different establishments and camps. Raiders all go by one-word nicknames and cover half or more of their faces with masks. Given they're a group based on not trusting the government, this feels very true to real life. Our main character in this book is called Ghost because he is the camp's scout who is very good at getting in and out of places without being noticed or killed. Now, I'm going to take the chance with Ghost and his best friend Rig to talk about something I really like in this series, and that's how much care and emphasis is put on platonic relationships. The first book has less of it because Danny has no human connections whatsoever, but the friendship he and Wynn have with Eden is very genuine, and Eden does his best to support Wynn even though he's a prickly antisocial weirdo. Eden's basically the golden retriever to his sopping wet cat. In the second book, the most driving force in the story is Hunter's friendship with Charlie. He is willing to do anything for Charlie. He is traveling the wastes with a monster he just met, not knowing where they're going or what's going to happen, and he does not care because he is getting Charlie back. He pairs up with somebody he thinks is a freaking serial killer because Eden has assured him this guy gives us a chance of helping Charlie. There are multiple times where people assume they have to be a couple or they have to be in love. And every time it's, no, he's my best friend, and that matters just as much. In the third book, the platonic relationships we get are generally around the camp, but the main one is between Ghost and his best friend Rig. Rig is the camp's tech guy, and he and Ghost have traveled to the destroyed military bunker where Wynn and all the other monsters were being held. Rick and Ghost end up coming across the only monster left in the destroyed military base where the monsters were held, and it happens to be Specimen 001, the first ever monster captured by the military, who we were told in the previous book is one of the deadliest and scariest monsters to ever exist. All other monsters fear it. One of these creatures killed an entire species of ultra strong monsters. So we have the delicious dramatic irony of knowing this incredibly dangerous creature is right in front of them, and they see the most traumatized sopping wet cat they've ever met in their lives. The sopping wet cat is actually a sopping wet bird. His name is Auri, and he has, like, bird feet below his knees and two giant wings, and one of them's kind of broken, and he's, like, all pale, and he has, like, black veins all over him, and he is very clearly traumatized and will not even move or look up. Now, I loved Rig and immediately wanted him to be the protagonist of a future book with how he interacts with Auri. He is so gentle and sweet. His first instinct is to get on his level and speak very calmly and try to make sure that this random monster they found is okay. At first, Ghost is convinced that Auri is afraid of him because he has a nervous tic and he won't look at Ghost and he will flinch when he talks. But then Ghost ends up being the first person Auri speaks to, and they start to develop a bond that way. When they first get back to camp, basically the only reason that this random monster is allowed to stay is because the camp leader and co-founder recognizes him. It turns out that he actually helped establish the Raider camp and build their wall, which is made out of a bunch of shipping containers, and it's one of the only reasons they've managed to last as long as they have. So this gains him the trust of some, but not all of the camp. A lot of the trust is very tentative, especially with the recurring bigoted character, Cutter. I promised you morbidity and violence. We are getting there. Due to what we know from the second book, Auri is the proverbial bomb under the table. We know something big and dramatic is going to happen with him eventually, but the main characters do not. Even when they are warned by a half monster they know, they don't believe him because Auri is just so timid and sweet. But the thing we know from the previous book is that his species are set off when their loved ones are hurt. So when Auri and Ghost travel to a Raider camp nearby that has since had their leadership overthrown by a bunch of bigots, they are met with hostility, and Auri doesn't care if anybody hurts him. He was tortured for years and did nothing. But somebody punches Ghost, and he loses complete control, turns into a giant 20-foot monster, and rips every single person in that camp except for Ghost into literal shreds. We get descriptions of him ripping a guy in half with his talons, flying up into the air and not just dropping people, but throwing them at the hard ground until they turn into putty. Not a single person is spared in this. Even the ones who were only kind of going along with the new leadership because they were scared. Near the end of this conflict, Ghost has started to calm Auri down, and there's a lone raider who somehow survived, and instead of doing the smart thing and running away, he decides to shoot at Auri. Auri with a semi-automatic and nothing. Something vaguely gets close to Ghost, and he loses it again. And it is obviously terrifying and upsetting to Ghost. He doesn't know what's happening, and he doesn't know if he can trust Auri anymore, but Auri is just as terrified. Auri had no idea he could do that, and he doesn't even know what his trigger is. We, as the reader, know, but they have to figure it out. Later on, when they come across some military people, Auri once again massacres every single combatant there. This time they at least all deserve it. This is where Ghost and Auri start to piece together what the trigger is. That Ghost specifically is the trigger. And that wouldn't be a problem, except Cutter is a massive bigot who hates Ghost. And if one person in the camp tries to hurt Ghost, Auri could end up hurting the innocent people around them. This leads to a third act breakup where Auri leaves Ghost, and he is devastated not just by this, but by Rig leaving to set up the sequel. I really, really like that both his new lover and his best friend are given the same amount of weight to him. Ghost ends up spending a few chapters in just this deep state of depression and despair, and his friends have to basically force him to eat and lock him in his room so he doesn't run out into a forest full of monsters in the middle of the night. The depression is conveyed very well, and I'm glad it doesn't overstay its welcome. Ghost starts to come out of the depression when he makes up his mind to go after Rig, because even if he can't find Owry, he knows where Rig is. But before Ghost can do that, the aforementioned half-monster who told them how dangerous Owry was in the first place ends up bringing Owry back specifically for Ghost. Given how hot this character is, it's very clear that he's going to be another main character in a future book. This character's name is Moth. If I had a nickel for every post-apocalyptic queer character in America who was a nomad named Moth, I would have 2 nickels. There are so many things I keep forgetting to say about the series. I swear the editing is going to be a mess. Writing-wise, the author does a really good job of making each main character / narrator have their own distinct voice and flavor. Danny's easygoing and sweet and funny. Hunter is serious and short-tempered. Ghost is soft and introspective. And knowing Rig's personality, he's gonna be a weird one. Audiobook-wise, sometimes the reader was really, really good. Other times he made odd choices. Like, he would randomly give certain characters accents that didn't quite make sense. There's a character called Bo who he gives a southern accent, but is from SoCal. Hunter is supposed to be very stoic and serious, but the reader gives him a little too much bounce and personality, if that makes sense. And then Owry, he's supposed to have a low but soft voice, and apparently the reader took that to mean Whoopi Nicola Orsonov. There's another character named Lilac who is supposed to speak with almost no inflection in a very flat, casual tone at all times, but comes off more as Valley Girl. I'm probably going to read his book rather than listen for that reason. There were other dark or morbid books I tried to read along with these ones that just, I couldn't do it. The first one, Metal from Heaven, was so dark and heavy at the outset. It was beautifully written, but I couldn't handle the very realistic violence against innocent people and children in the middle of a strike zone, and the political spin on it, and the starvation of a child, and it was so heavy, and it was a straight fantasy book. The other book I tried reading is called Those Girls, which is about 3 sisters who end up murdering their abusive father and running away to change their identities. The description mostly talks about them being adults after the fact when evidence is uncovered, but the first several chapters of the book are spent entirely on said abusive childhood. And it is, even after the dad is dead, it is so stressful and heavy, and I couldn't handle it. The biggest reason that the romance genre is really good for this sort of thing is that no matter how dark it gets, no matter how much death and violence is there, you know it is always going to have a happy ending. You know that none of the characters we truly care about are going to be permanently harmed. I went in to Eden knowing that Charlie would come back alive. I went into book 3 knowing that Rig would be safe and Owry would not hurt any innocents in camp, because it is a romance. And romance, by the very definition of the genre, has to have a happy ending. A thriller or a straight fantasy you never know which outcome you're going to get. I could stand the horrific torture of Danny because I knew for a fact that even though he was presumed dead, Wynn would come in and save him. I could stand the prison scenes with Hunter and Charlie because I knew that Wynn and Eden and Danny would get them out. I could handle the bigotry that Ghost and Owry faced because I knew they needed to be happy together. And not having read the next book, I know that Rig is going to be okay after leaving the camp because he is going to get a happy ever after. There's a part in the third book where Ghost is going through his depressive episode and trying to distract himself by reading. He's reading a historical nonfiction book, and at some point he says something along the lines of, "There's nothing like reading about people dying of tuberculosis to take your mind off heartbreak." And apparently the opposite is also true. Now, I am not dying. I am going to be all right. But it's hard not to worry about the future, what could still develop, what might have been missed, and what I might have to deal with going forward. But if nothing else, the monster love will take my mind off it for a little while and let me feel those dark thought spirals with a safe place to land. There are definitely pacing issues. The first book is very front-loaded. The third book is very back-loaded. The second book has a sweet romance, but in my opinion, the least interesting of the romances so far. The third book does do better with having more established side characters. The different members of the camp, the co-leader of the camp who is missing the usual first in command, who we know for a fact is alive because he was in book 2, but they think he's dead. I really like the way they do the interconnectedness, both with the second book having Danny and Wynn playing more major roles than they might usually get in this sort of series, and the dramatic ironies we get in book 3. It's the surprisingly plausible explanation that when the monster showed up, the US military's already bloated budget got inflated even more, and they eventually just took over the entire government, and now the military completely runs society and has a bunch of propaganda, and if you don't live under their protection, you're gonna die, and they kick out anybody who steps even a little out of line. Rig got kicked out into the wastes at 17 because he was stealing money for food. They will do this to anybody, no questions asked, simply because they can. And at every turn, it is made clear that the cruelty is the point. They torture the monsters at the military base because they can. They are revealed to be involved in the underground fighting ring for their own entertainment, and because they can. They provide weaponry and armor and supplies to this fighting ring. They provide supplies and luxuries to a woman who collects monsters because they can. The only thing they care about is causing pain and hurting monsters and gaining power. And it's such a switch going from the first 2 books being about soldiers with an inside perspective to a raider who has lived in the wastes most of his life and is not blinded by the propaganda that the military has fed them. Which is, I do like its focus on the world building and the dark experiences and the antagonists. It does still very largely focus on the romances, despite them being monsters. It never falls into that metaphorical monster territory that a lot of books can sometimes fall into, particularly straight books. It is all very reassuring and sweet every step of the way. I think my major complaint with the romances would be that they're is not nearly enough variety in genitalia. Isn't that kind of the whole point of the monster love genre? Like, I thought that was kind of the big thing with it, and like with aliens and stuff, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm probably gonna end up tagging on the actually thoughtful thing about experiencing darkness in a safe environment at the end, but if not, oh well, we're ending on monster genitals. Okay, Aaron, I will see you another time.